There's just about no point asking who would win in a fight between Joe Calzaghe and Carl Froch. I think the question was asked, was it by Boxing News? The YouTube channel used to be ID Boxing. And it was pretty much 100% in Calzaghe's favour. All these fighters and trainers. There's, the small chance Froch believes he has, winning by knockout. Even he concedes. It's kind of a slim one. If it goes to points, he's losing. So there's just no point opening that question again. It's pretty one-sided. But in a recent video I did about Froch, and the question as to whether or not he's overrated, and I've got a lot of no's, I think by a lot of British people, which doesn't help actually, because I was speaking specifically about a certain sentiment which I think is present right now in Britain, rather than the world stage. Nonetheless, there were some good comments, and somebody left one going something to the tune of, look, Froch just fought much better fighters. And it was a comment that gave me reason to pause a little bit and think, my first instinct is Froch fought more good fighters in his career. And so there's no point, of course, asking who we think the better of the two was. We already know that answer. I did think it would be interesting if we just took a closer look at their respective resumes and see how they compare. There was that period around 2008 when a Froch-Calzaghe fight maybe could have happened, but I always felt around the time that Froch's profile wasn't big enough to force the fight, and Calzaghe, of course, was hunting bigger fish in America. Hopkins, Roy Jones Jr., much bigger names, whatever was left of Jones, a much bigger name than Carl Froch in 2008 still. And come 2009, when Carl Froch got that real career-boosting victory over Jermaine Taylor, announcing himself to the Yanks, Calzaghe, of course, had no intentions of fighting again. So all we're left with is their careers to analyse, and I'm going to kick it off with their title-winning efforts. And straight away we have some symmetry here, because they both won vacant titles. Calzaghe in 97 against the legendary Chris Eubank Sr., and Carl Froch, the WBC, at 168, of course, as well, against a younger Jean Pascal. The latter fight was closer and entertaining. The other one was much more dominant against an undeniably jaded Eubank Sr. Eubank, of course, a greater fighter than Pascal, but taking into account when they fought these guys. Though Calzaghe was as dominant as you could hope for, flooring Eubank twice, and arguably winning every single round, Pascal was probably a more potent force at that point. He still had a lot more to do in his career, up at light heavyweight as well. And because it was still a clear win for Froch, his stamina coming into play again, I've got to give him the edge here. And the symmetry continues when we look at the performances which many people believe to be their peak performances in their careers. Calzaghe against Jeff Lacey in 2006, and Carl Froch against Lucien Butte in 2012. Calzaghe was the favourite against Lacey, but only just, which was very notable in his career. Since taking the title off Eubank, there were many frustrating years, which I was a part of, where it felt like he's just not really fighting any quality. Where's his boogeyman? Well, Lacey was supposed to be the boogeyman for him, and Calzaghe just absolutely slapped him across the ring, winning every round. Didn't he floor him near the end of it? It was a wonderful performance. You could say exposing Lacey a little bit, who then would fall off a cliff in terms of his career performances, creating the phrase, a fighter getting Lacey'd, if the same thing happened to them. Well, the same kind of thing happened to Butte as well, in fairness, after Froch absolutely pulverised him over 5 rounds. And I do remember thinking while watching that one live that, what's going on here with Butte? Okay, Froch is all pumped up, he's letting his hands go, but why are you getting so easily pinned to the ropes? Why aren't you moving off? Why aren't you clinching? And he really did seem to lose heart early. This was, like Jeff Lacey, a good but flawed fighter. Flaws that were further bared out in the losses they'd both suffer in the not-too-distant future. And for that reason, it doesn't take away from the fact they were brilliant performances. Maybe Calzaghe's just having that little bit more shine to it, just real exhibition stuff. But I am going to rate them equal here on this particular segment. And so we get onto the not-so-small topic of Mikkel Kessler. I think for many people, this is the opponent that tips things in Calzaghe's favour. It very arguably is Calzaghe's best victory because he clearly beat a prime Mikkel Kessler, who actually was participating in his 40th fight at that point, and he had already been a world champion for a few years. I think a lot of people forget the mileage Kessler already had certainly by the time he fought Froch, a younger man in years, but had put his body through quite a lot of competition. There were 3, maybe 4 rounds Kessler got, the 4th round being the clearest when he crunched Joe with his sharp right hand as a cross and an uppercut. But Joe's just ability to blend and switch from the attack to the defense, the great feet, the way he was always mixing up what he was doing without being too reckless. It was just too much for Kessler to keep up with. A beautiful boxing exhibition in Cardiff, and yeah, at that point we had to say fair play, he's finally got his solid wins. With Froch, we know the score. It's 1-1 in a tremendous 2-fight series. Kessler narrowly winning the first time round, and Froch winning a bit more convincingly in the rematch 3 years later, but being Kessler's last fight, probably was a bit jaded, and really leaves it open, the big question, as to who was the better of those two. Clearly, Calzaghe has the edge here. And then last, but certainly not least, we are going to look at the controversial decisions they both had. I was admittedly more of a B-Hop fan at the time, and there may have been a little contrarian in me that just wanted to see Calzaghe lose his perfect record. But having watched it again recently, Calzaghe's activity and B-Hop just not being active enough doesn't make it that hard to score. It's one of those ones that maybe you could push it to a draw. The argument that Hopkins won is pretty difficult to see. The scoring range, if anybody won fairly wide, it does seem to go towards Calzaghe, who remained busy but was, the key point, still landing shots. And so I do have to kind of question this fight's controversial label. One that does still get dug up from time to time is that WBO defense against Robin Reed in 1999. Undoubtedly a close fight. Calzaghe had to eat some really big right hands off Reed, who fought in that with that very stiff posture, not jabbing much, waiting for his moments, but he was making his moments count when he swung for the fences. He did get a point taken off at some point by the pretty austere reffing of Roy Francis back in the day, and for me that means this can't be better than a draw in terms of worst case scenario for Calzaghe. I think I had it about 7-5. He had a pretty good start. I did have him winning the last 2 rounds, as per usual, because he was the busier. So the rightful decision for me is, yes, he wins by a whisker, but he wins nonetheless. And so we get onto the tender subject of Carl Froch's hometown defence against American Andre Dirrell in 2009. Part of the Super 6 tournament. Should Froch have advanced? I don't think so. I think a draw is the best case scenario for the Cobra, who, in terms of headshots landed, you can probably count them on one hand. Yes, Dirrell was being negative, and he got penalised for that at some point, had a point taken off. But between all the clinching and the lateral movement and the big difference in speed, he completely reduced Froch's output, landed output, to almost nil. And so, even if he's the one being negative, if I see a few Dirrell body shots and a couple of okay headshots, and that's all that's happened that's noteworthy, the round's going to him. When you watch it back now, it's kind of funny just hearing how much the crowd are roaring on combinations that are pretty much just all hitting air. No doubt the judges were swayed, clearly, by the hometown support. But looking at, say, Calzaghe Hopkins, the difference here is that Calzaghe is still landing. He's being busy, there's effort, but he's more composed. The odd shot of, say, a 3-4 punch cluster is getting through. With Froch, pretty much nothing was getting through, and so I can't give him the fight. What that would have meant had he lost in terms of how things would have played out, whether he would have given Dirrell a rematch, I can't say. But just looking at Calzaghe and Froch's records as they stand, it is Froch, with his one controversial decision, who was more fortunate to get it than Calzaghe was in his 2 close fights. And so, unfortunately for Froch baby, much like the proposed fantasy fight that he always seems to lose, I've got to have him losing here as well in terms of who's got the better record. Calzaghe really did pick up the slack in terms of his quality opponents later on, and then when we factor in performances, like ask yourself right now, why is Terence Crawford and Naoya Inoue so high pound for pound? It's because of what they do to the opponent. It's the gulf in class. And Calzaghe was always 2-3 steps ahead. So much talent, that ability to adapt on the cuff, which helped him, of course, against the likes of Hopkins, made him start to play it a bit smarter against Kessler after eating a few hard ones. He had those higher level abilities and IQ that really separates him from the guys, the overachievers really, which is what Froch was, who showed you can get very far with a lot of application and some talent, but you're never going to be the creme de la creme. And Andre Ward, who was the man of his era, beat the Cobra so convincingly that there's no leverage to be had, even if we do rightfully concede that Calzaghe never fought anyone as good as a Prime Ward. Well, that'll just about wrap this one up. Let me know what you thought of my scoring criteria. More importantly, am I missing anything? Any little points which could shed some more favourable light on the Cobra? And why, of course, he thinks, deep down in his heart, that he is better than Joe Calzaghe. Spoons up.